I want to start with a little story. It's about good old Mullah Nasruddin. Mullah Nasruddin in Sufi stories is always the wise man or the fool, and sometimes in the story he's actually both. But this is a story about Mullah and his donkey. And Mullah and his donkey were crossing the border from one country into another, and he did it every day. And so he became very friendly with the border guards, and they exchanged pleasantries, and they asked about each other's families, and they became quite close friends as he went back and forth every day on his donkey across the border. But the border guards began to get suspicious because suddenly Mullah's clothes were nicer. And the saddle on his donkey got more expensive, and the food that he was bringing on his journey was richer, and they realized that somehow he is prospering from this daily trip across the border, and they can't figure out how. So they search him, they ask him questions, they quiz him, they think up ways that they can trick him into figuring out what it is that he's smuggling across the border. Finally, by the end of all this, Mullah he knows the routine. He has to strip down, they have to check his shoes, check his clothes, check his saddlebags, check his lunch. They can't find anything. It drives them crazy, but still it goes on. Years later, one of those border guards runs into Mullah Nasruddin and he says, "You know, Mullah, it's way past the time. It doesn't matter anymore legally, but it drives us all crazy. What on earth were you smuggling across the border that we couldn't understand?" And he said, "Oh, I was smuggling donkeys." So sometimes what you want to see is right in front of you, but it doesn't appear in the way that you expect it to. So say it with me 3 times. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. So true. I'm going to turn off this little heater. So, the theme for 2013 is turn up the juice, turn on your life. And Reverend Barb talked last month in January about RTFM, read the manual, because there are so many of us when we get a new something, a new tool, we take it right out of the box and start using it, guys, without reading the instructions. Or maybe that's just my guy, I don't know. Anyway, it's me too. But anyway, so she talked about how we needed to figure out how to use these tools that we've been given. And so we talked about the tools of creation and of making that juicy life that Chalice always talks about. And so that's where we went in February. Excuse me, in January. In February, we're going to love the juice, love your life. And I want to talk about several things this month. And I want to talk about loving and understanding yourself, loving and understanding your God, and loving and understanding your neighbor. And I have been, and of course, you are the juice, God is the source of the juice, the neighbor is the bitter or often unfamiliar juice. And I've been reading several books on on getting ready for this month. I've been reading a book called Women, Food, and God by Janine Roth. Excellent book. It could be called Men, Workaholism, and God. It could be called Humans, Shopping, Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll, and God. Any compulsive or coping mechanism behavior that we use that keeps us from feeling our feelings also keeps us from feeling God, also keeps us from that relationship with God that we get to when we are at our most authentic self. The other book that I'm reading is Why Quantum Physicists Don't Get Fat. And this is really, I mean, it's a cute book, but it's more about quantum physics for dummies. And with what I know about quantum physics, this is the perfect book for me because I know absolutely nothing. So I'm learning a little bit from that book. 2 more books that I'm reading are by Gary Chapman. They're called The 5 Love Languages and Love as a Way of Life, and we'll be talking about them later in the month. But he is a marriage counselor who has found through counseling thousands of couples that we actually each have our own special language of love that we speak. That's how we like to give love, and it's how we like to receive love. And when we know that, we can transform our relationships. So we'll talk about that. The next book that I've been reading has just been blowing my mind and turning my world upside down. It's called Proof of Heaven by Dr. Eben Alexander, and I'll talk about him later, but he's a neuroscientist who wrote a book about his near-death experience. And then the last book I'm reading is The Hidden Gospel by Sadi Neil Douglas Klotz, who's my teacher. And as you remember, you might know that he has been studying for the last 30 years, taking the teachings of Jesus and putting them in from the original Aramaic language that Jesus spoke, putting them into a poetic modern day translation. And if you're wondering how on earth could you take 7 books, and how can you read 7 at a time, and why would you take 7 at a time and try to make cohesive talks out of them, I wonder that too. But we're going to go for it. So, and on top of everything else, it was Groundhog Day yesterday. How about that? And my favorite Rev, besides Barb, of course, Reverend David Bruner, always says that we religious scientists, we Centers for Spiritual Living, we should co-opt Groundhog Day as our high holy holiday. First of all, he says, because that's the only pagan holiday that Christian religions haven't swiped as their own and started their own traditions on. But not only that, when you think about the movie Groundhog Day, you remember how Bill Murray kept living the same day and the same day and the same day until finally someone said, why don't you use that time to make yourself better? And he started making himself better. He started working on himself, and his life started to get better. So that is, if you want to have something in your life, you have to be something in your life. So that is our perfect holiday. So happy holidays, everybody. Now, I'm going to go back to the Hidden Gospel. This is the book from my teacher. Jesus, we all remember this probably from some point in our teaching. Jesus had 2 commandments, and he said, these are the most important commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Remember that? Does that sound at all familiar? Well, I like that he said your God. He didn't say love my God. He didn't say love someone else's God. He didn't say love the God that I'm going to impose upon you and make you believe in. He said love God as you know it to be. Love that. And my teacher says that he said love the deepest part of yourself, that place where God dwells within. And as we learn to love God within with all of our heart, when we're in that place, when we look out in the world, we see it in others. And here's his translation of that passage. He says, from the deepest part of yourself, let love be born for the rays of the one that shine around you. Let this come from your whole heart, from the center of your life, your passion, courage, and audacity, and let it touch your whole self. From this self, liberate your whole animal energy and life force to flood your entire grasping mind with love. And then draw a breath of compassion for the one mysteriously drawn to live near you. Love that friend as you love the self that dwells within. That's what we're going to talk about this month. Loving ourselves, loving God, and loving our neighbor. So first, we have to love and understand ourselves and who we are. And who we are is whole, perfect, and complete, made in the image and likeness of God, dwelling here on earth as a vessel through which the divine expresses itself. And if you ask those 80 million kids who were here to go to church today, if you went in there and asked them who they were, they would parrot that back to you, which is good. And the reason why is because we've been telling them that since they could hear. You are whole, perfect, and complete. The problem for us is, we're so blessed to have those kids who know that, but the problem for us is that's not what we were told when we grew up. I doubt if many of us, our parents said over and over to us again, you're whole and perfect and complete. You are made in the image and likeness of God, and you are an expression of divine here on earth. We heard something else. And what we heard sometimes is that part of us is broken. And I want to read you what Janine says about that. She says, somewhere along the line, I started believing that the purpose of living was to pass the test I'd be given when I died. At the moment of my last breath, there would be a judgment hearing at which I'd be forced to review my life. Given my propensity toward taking the biggest piece of anything and amassing large quantities of earrings when so much of the world lived on less than $1 a day, there would be no doubt about the verdict. I was going to hell. And then she says, when I first meet people who come to my retreats, I see those same beliefs funneled through the relationship with food or drugs or sex or rock and roll or overworking or isolation or all those things. And it's if these people are punishing themselves with rigorous rules which will make up for something inherently damaged, fundamentally wrong with their very existence. And I know that all of us, I certainly do it too, that when something happens to us that is not wonderful, that is not what we wanted in life, our first thought is not, well, I am whole and perfect and complete. I am made in the image and likeness of God. My first thought goes to something like, this always happens to me. I jump into victim consciousness. I become the martyr. I do all those things because I wasn't born, I wasn't raised with that great dogma. I mean, we don't believe in dogma, but that's a good one, that you are whole and perfect and complete. And I can tell you, after 16 years of being a practitioner and counseling people on every subject under the universe, that all comes down to one thing, and that is the belief that we are not worthy. And that is the belief that we are separated from God. That's the bottom line of all of it. And so the first thing we have to do when we start to love ourselves is we have to believe that about us, that there is nothing broken about us, that we are inherently whole. Now, old science, this is from the quantum physics guy, old science, the science that we've believed up until quantum physics was action based. And that kind of science was based on Newton's laws, and it said, I'll believe it when I see it, right? I'll believe it when I see it. Let's do an experiment and see if we can reproduce that. Quantum physics, which is the new science which we're all in, and it's a new understanding of the universe, is energy based. And they say, I'll see it when I believe it. And they say that you can squish down quantum physics into one experiment. And that's that they shot 2 electrons from a machine through a board that had slits cut in it. And what the electrons looked like on the other side of the board, on the wall, on the other side of the board, depends on who's looking at it. And depends on what they expect to see. So all of life is about what we expect. All of what we're experiencing is what we condition ourselves to see. It's so far out of the realm of explanation. I'm only giving you that much because that's all I know. But what they say in the book is that the universe is actually a non-local, unbounded energy field of all possibility. Deepak Chopra calls that the infinite field of all possibility. And that means that going this way, this way, this way, in every direction and dimensions that we don't even know of, from us, around us, and through us, there is this field of possibility. And that field takes our seed of thought, our seed of belief, our seed of habit, and it brings forth into our life that which we put into it. And the only problem with that is it brings forth everything we put into it, or the most dominant thoughts that we put into it. So when we say things never work out for me, that's the seed we planted. And then we expect things not to work out for us, and we look for things not to work out for us, and guess what? Things don't work out for us. When we plant in the seed that I am abundant, I am an abundant creature, and abundance flows through me, and we expect that to happen, and we do the things that are necessary to make that happen, and we see abundance all around us, that's the experience that we have of life. And that's not voodoo, that's science. That's just really how it is. And when quantum physicists explain the universe and religious scientists explain God, they use the same words. They say the same thing. And Dr. Eben Alexander says that he used to think as a scientist that it was science and spirituality and that they could not be combined, that they were absolutely separate. And now he says they cannot be torn apart, that they are absolutely together. Now, Dr. Alexander is a neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon. And 8 years before this event that happened to him, he had something else happen in his life that absolutely destroyed his belief in God. It destroyed his belief that there was a loving presence or being that cared anything about us, and that prayer worked at all. And so he was, in effect, an agnostic and a scientist. And so when his patients would tell him, religious experience they'd had, he would pat them. Yes, that's very nice. And be kind, but that's all. And then he developed a strain. It's the first strain in the world that has ever happened of E. coli spinal meningitis that happened spontaneously in his body. That's a bacterial infection of the brain and the spine. As a matter of fact, when they went to check his spinal fluid to see if he had meningitis, your spinal fluid is clear and very viscous, and that's what they expect to see. His was thick white green. It was so infected. His whole spinal column and his whole brain were enclosed in infection. And he was in a coma for 7 days. And all the tests they took, all the brain scans they took, everything they did showed that he was absolutely brain dead for 7 days, and that the neocortex, the outside of his brain, which is where we have our sense of who we are and our visual senses, and if we had hallucinations, that's where they would come from, was that part of the brain, that was all shut down. 7 days. And at the end of 7 days, they were speaking to his wife, his doctors were speaking to his wife, and they said, after today, he has a 2% chance of living. And he has a 0% chance of being anything but in a vegetative comatose state for the rest of his life. And so we're recommending that we take off life support. And just at that moment, his sister came running down the hall and said, Eben woke up. And so, of course, they all ran down the hall, and there he was sitting up in bed trying to get his breathing tube out. So they took that out, and they said he looked at them all and said, all is well. All is well. Oh, I have goosebumps. Or maybe I'm cold. So, anyway, he did 3 months of rehabilitation, and he went back to his work as a neurosurgeon and a neuroscientist. And this book, Proof of Heaven, is about where he was for those 7 days. And he says that he had a near-death experience deeper than any other near-death experiences have been, because people who usually have near-death experiences see the tunnel, see the light, see relatives, but the part of his brain that helps you understand who you are was dead. So he went into this experience without having any thought that he was anything other than where he was. He had nothing pulling him from the back. He didn't have any sense of, I'm leaving anything behind. He was just in a sense of, here I am in this moment, in this present, right now. And so he had this incredibly profound experience, which you need to read the book because he's very articulate and it's beautifully written, and I don't want to paraphrase it for you. But he learned 3 things while he was there. The first was, you are loved and cherished deeply forever. You have nothing to fear, and there is nothing you can do wrong. You have nothing to fear, there is nothing you can do wrong, and you are loved and cherished deeply and forever. Now, I know we think about what people do on this side of the veil and bad things, and we think of evil and wrong and all those deals, and we're going to talk about those later this month. But for right now, we talk about the fact that there's nothing we can do wrong. There's nothing for us to fear, and we are loved deeply, fully, and completely. And he had the experience of meeting what he called Om, because he said God, or any other word that we use for God, is so small and so limiting and so that he can't use that word anymore. He has to use something bigger because it's so big. And here's what he says. This is directly from his book. He says, there is only one substance that makes up this and every other universe and everything in it, and that substance is unconditional love. He says, this is the reality of realities, the incomprehensible, glorious truth of truths that lives and breathes at the core of everything that exists or that will ever exist. And no remotely accurate understanding of who and what we are can be achieved by anyone who does not know this and embody unconditional love in all of their actions. Don't you love that? No remotely accurate understanding of who and what we are can be achieved by anyone who does not understand that we are only unconditional love. So first, in our quest this week to love ourselves, is we have to feel that unconditional love. And we have to be able to receive that unconditional love. The first minister I had in a spiritualist church was Reverend Eugene Lahr, and he used to always say that there were three lessons that we came here to learn. And one of them was always the giving and receiving of love. And the hardest part of that lesson was the receiving of love. Because we go back to that inherent unworthiness that we feel somewhere in us, that we can't accept that deep unconditional love. Well, that's our task for this week. And I don't have goosebumps anymore, so I wasn't cold. It was about the heaven thing. Um, so my assignment for you this week is to look for the ways that love is loving you in your life. And I want to tell you a little story about Jim and I. Some of you have heard it, but some of you haven't, so it bears repeating. We met on the internet, as most of you know, back when nobody did that. So we were pioneers on meeting on the internet. And when Jim came to live with me, I wanted him to go to my therapist. I wanted us to have couples counseling because I just thought that would be a good idea. And of course, it was a stupid idea because we were in love and we went to the therapist and was like, we'll never fight. And, we love each other. So after an hour of us goo-gooing over each other, she said, would you like to do a sand tray about your relationship? And a sand tray is a therapeutic process where you have a tray of sand. And then she has on her wall shelves full of baskets, and the baskets have everything in them, shells and flowers and rocks and plastic babies and monsters and whatever. And you take those things, you go through and just pick out whatever you want, and you make a little tableau in the sand about whatever the subject is. And she says we do this because our psyche speaks to us in pictures. So you go along and you do this, maybe not thinking about it, and then you explain it to her, and all of a sudden you get some ahas like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't realize that's what I was feeling. So, but I've done this before. So she sets us loose. She takes a big sandbox and she draws a line down the middle. I go over and I get the beautiful glass, those little glass flat beads that they have put in gardens and stuff. And I get all the green ones and the blue ones and the clear ones. And I start with this little spiral in the middle of green dots. And then I do little blue glass things. And then I do blue and green together. And then I do blue and green and white together. And then I finish with white all around the outside. So there's this gorgeous spiral of glass. Gorgeous. And then I look at Jim's side. And Jim has put a dog with a broken leg on it. And he's put a little heart that's like velvet, that has the velvet worn off of the heart there. And then there's a giant basketball completely out of proportion to everything else on the whole thing. And a clump of, plastic flowers. And I think, does he not see my side? Like, honestly, what? And then I look at my therapist like, aren't you going to tell him that he's doing it wrong? I don't get that. You can't see that we're so awful. And then inside I begin to cry because I think I cannot marry a man who does that. I mean, look at my side. And then the pièce de résistance, at the very end, he takes a big purple plastic Barbie's Dream Castle bridge, and he puts it on his side and touches my side with the bridge. I'm just like, this is never going to work. So my therapist says, would you explain this to us? And so I start in and I say, well, the green stones represent my soul, and this is my soul as an individual, and the blue stones represent Jim's soul, and Jim as an individual. And then our souls begin to get together, and the white stones represent God, and then God comes into our relationship, and then God circles our relationship, and then we circle and spiral up to the heavens with our relationship. And then I look at him. And he says, well, the dog represents unconditional love, and that's the way I love you. And he said, and this heart is kind of tattered, and he said, we're both older. We've both had our hearts broken, and so I'm bringing my heart as best as I can to this relationship. And this basketball reminds me to play. And the flowers are that I want us to remember to stop and smell the flowers all along the way. And on and on and on he goes. And each thing is deeper and more profound than the thing before. And then he gets to the bridge. And he says, Jana, I know that your heart has been broken before. And I know that you are not ready to love me with all of you. But I am here on the other side of this bridge with a completely open heart waiting for you. And when you're ready to cross that bridge, I am ready to take you into my arms. I married him. Oh, yeah. So, here's the deal about that. Love What I wanted was right in front of me. It just wasn't in a way that I expected it or in a form that I thought I would see it. But there it was. So that's what you're going to look for this week is where is love right in front of you in a way that you maybe weren't expecting. And, I always like to give something away when we do it, when I speak here. Today, this is your assignment for the week, is we're going to throw caution to the wind. And what we're going to do this week is we're going to love courageously, fully, open-heartedly, and we're going to extend that love to our whole self. We're just going to throw caution to the wind and love ourselves wholeheartedly all the way. And then we're going to throw caution to the wind and we're going to let ourselves be loved wholeheartedly in that same way. So this week, what I want you to remember to do is to remember that love appears in ways that you might not expect it. And the way that we love ourselves is to remember to throw caution to the wind. Throw everything your parents ever said to you to the wind. Throw everything the universe ever said to you to the wind. Throw everything you ever believed about yourself except the fact that you are whole, perfect, and complete, made in the image and likeness of God. Throw that away and love yourself today, wholly, fully, and completely. Who would like to have prayer? All right. So in this moment, what I know is that we stand in the very center of the presence of God, that heart, that life, that mind, that soul, that energy, that entity, that endless field of all possibility is where we stand right now, and it is holy ground. And it is in us, and it is through us, and it is all around us. We walk in it, we live in it, it breathes our breath and beats our heart. It is all that we are, and we cannot be separated from it in any way. And when we know that truth to the depths of our being, when we know that truth that we are one with the beloved and that all that it has is ours to have for the asking, then there is nothing to ask for because it is all ours already. So in that deep place where we love ourselves, where we see ourselves as God does, we see ourselves as the perfect loving being that God is. In that place, relationships are healed, abundance is found, health is returned to perfection. In that place, anything unlike that unconditional love that we are simply fades away with our next breath. In that place, we are exalted, we are lifted up, we are brought to the highest level of expression that we can be. And so for each person here, I absolutely know that as they travel through this week, throwing caution to the wind, that they are absolutely the presence of love, that they allow love in, that they love every single cell of their being in ways they never had before, every part, until their entire body, every cell, every organ, every system, every thought that they have is bathed in unconditional love, and that there is nothing that can stand in the way of that can deprive us of that. It is ours, it is our birthright, and I claim it for all of us here and now. Claim it for yourself by saying yes. Say it again. Say it again. Absolutely. And so I release these words into that infinite field, knowing that my words plant seeds, and that those seeds are absolutely returned to us as we expect them to, and we expect them to return to us in a glorious way, right here, right now. And there is nothing for us to do but let that be and claim that blessing for yourself with me by saying, and so it is.